An elderly woman begged for food at a mansion. Little did she know, the owner was the love she never forgot. Hello, viewer. Thanks for joining us. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. "The same dream again," murmured Matthew Harrison as his blue eyes slowly opened in the dawn's penumbra. The three-story mansion stretched silently around him, as empty as his heart had been for the past 7 years. At 78 years old, Matthew had learned that material wealth couldn't fill the void left by loneliness. But each morning he got up hoping that maybe, just maybe, this day would be different. He sat up in the king-size bed where he had once slept beside Grace, his late wife, and observed the empty space beside him. The Italian silk sheets remained perfect, untouched, as if waiting for someone who would never return. Matthew ran a trembling hand through his white hair, perfectly combed even upon waking, a habit of decades that he maintained through pure discipline. "Good morning, my love," he whispered toward the silver-framed photograph on the nightstand. Grace's serene face looked back at him from behind the glass, frozen forever at 65, before cancer took her away. They had been 41 years of marriage, years of mutual respect, quiet companionship, building a business empire together. But it had never been the great love of his life. Matthew rose with the deliberation of someone who had all the time in the world and nowhere to go. His footsteps echoed on the marble bathroom floor as he prepared for another day, identical to the 3,000 that had passed since Grace's death. Warm water, lavender soap, the same routine that protected him from thinking too much about the past. But the past had cruel ways of seeping through the quietest moments. As water ran down his wrinkled but still distinguished face, a fleeting image crossed his mind. Honey-colored eyes, crystalline laughter, a voice that had once told him, "I will love you until my last breath." Matthew Harrison. Sophia. He murmured her name like a forgotten prayer, as he always did when he believed no one could hear him. Sophia Mitchell, the only woman he had truly loved, the one who had disappeared from his life more than 50 years ago, taking with her the possibility of being truly happy. He descended the marble stairs, gripping the mahogany banister, not out of necessity but from habit. The house stretched magnificently around him, 14-foot ceilings, bohemian crystal chandeliers, artworks worth fortunes hanging on walls that never saw visitors. Robert, his adopted son, constantly insisted that he hire household staff, that it wasn't good for a man his age to live completely alone in an 8-bedroom mansion. "Staff makes noise, Robert," he had told him the last time they had that conversation, "and I need the silence to remember." But what Matthew would never confess, not even to Robert, was that he was afraid that foreign voices would erase the echo of the only voice he still hoped to hear. In the kitchen, with black granite countertops and stainless steel appliances, Matthew prepared his solitary breakfast: 2 scrambled eggs, a slice of toasted bread, black coffee without sugar. The same combination he had breakfasted for the past 30 years. Grace used to say he was too predictable, that life needed surprises to keep the soul awake. What soul? He wondered as he chewed mechanically. Since Grace's death, and even more since his parents died 3 years ago, Matthew felt that he only existed, that he moved through inertia in a life that had lost all real meaning. He headed to his study, the only place in the house where he felt truly comfortable. The walls were covered with books he had read 2, 3 times: Tolstoy, Faulkner, Steinbeck. Stories of love and loss that resonated in his empty chest like echoes in an abandoned cathedral. He sat in his worn leather armchair, the only piece of furniture he had refused to replace in 40 years, and picked up the copy of Anna Karenina that eternally rested on the side table. But he didn't open it. Instead, he stared out the window toward the neglected garden. It had once been full of white and red roses, Grace's favorites. Now only wild grass grew among the stone paths. Matthew had dismissed the gardener after the funeral. He couldn't bear the idea of someone else touching the flowers she had loved. The telephone rang, interrupting his melancholic thoughts. Robert's familiar voice filled the study with his usual concern. "Good morning, Dad. How are you this morning?" "Like always, son, alive, though sometimes I wonder what for." Robert sighed on the other end of the line. At 45, he was a successful lawyer, married, with 2 teenage children who barely knew their adoptive grandfather. Matthew knew that Robert felt guilty for not visiting more often, but he also knew that his constant melancholy was a heavy burden even for the most devoted son. "Dad, I'm coming for lunch tomorrow, and I won't accept no for an answer." "Robert, you don't need to sacrifice your free time for a cranky old man." "You're not cranky, Dad. You're lonely, and that's not the same thing." After hanging up, Matthew stared at the silent telephone for a long time. Robert was right, of course. He was alone, deeply alone, but it wasn't a loneliness that could be cured with occasional visits or polite conversations. It was the loneliness of someone who had lived an entire life, wondering what would have happened if... He went to the desk, where he kept his most important documents. In the bottom right drawer, hidden beneath insurance policies and property deeds, was a small blue velvet box. With trembling hands, he opened it. Inside, a diamond engagement ring he had bought in 1971. A ring that never reached the finger for which it was designed. "Sophia," he whispered again, caressing the cold metal. 51 years, wondering why you abandoned me. 51 years asking myself if you ever really loved me, or if it was all a beautiful lie. The diamond sparkled under the morning light, filtering through the silk curtains, reflecting small rainbows on the study walls. Matthew closed his eyes, and for a moment, just a moment, he could hear her laughter again. He could feel her hands in his, could remember the promise they made under the stars on a summer night that now seemed to have occurred in another life. "I swear to you, Matthew Harrison, that I will love you until my last breath," she had said, with eyes bright with tears of happiness. "No matter what happens, no matter who tries to separate us, my heart will be yours forever." But promises, as he had learned painfully, sometimes break when life puts obstacles too big for love to overcome. He put the ring away with the same care with which he had stored it for more than 5 decades, and closed the drawer. Outside, clouds were beginning to gather in the sky, promising rain before sunset. The memory came without warning, as always happened in the silent afternoons when nostalgia found cracks in his armor of routine. Matthew closed his eyes, and suddenly he was 25 again, walking through the town square during the county fair in September 1970. He had returned from the University of Georgia with his business administration degree under his arm and his head full of plans to expand the family businesses. He was young, rich, handsome, and all the wealthy families in the state wanted him to court their daughters. But Matthew had developed a deep aversion to women in his social circle, all cut from the same pattern, educated to be decorative wives, without their own opinions, without fire in their eyes. And then he saw her. Sophia Mitchell was standing next to a flower stand, arguing animatedly with the vendor about the price of a bouquet of red carnations. She wore a simple blue cotton dress that enhanced her honey-colored eyes, and her chestnut hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders. But it wasn't her beauty that stopped Matthew's heart. It was the dignity with which she defended her position, the intelligence that shone in her gaze, the way she didn't let herself be intimidated by the merchant's protests. "Mr. Peterson," she was saying with a firm but respectful voice, "these carnations are wilted at the tips. I'm offering you $5, which is a fair price for flowers that will be completely dry tomorrow." Matthew approached without thinking, hypnotized by that voice that would have the power to torment him for the rest of his life. "Excuse the intrusion," he said, removing his hat with courtesy, "but the young lady is right. Allow me to pay $10 for the bouquet, which is what fresh flowers are worth for a lady who deserves them. Sophia turned toward him, and when their eyes met, Matthew knew with absolute certainty that he had just met the woman he wanted to spend the rest of his life with. It wasn't love at first sight, it was recognition, as if their souls had been searching for each other for entire lifetimes and had finally found each other. "You're very kind, sir," she said with a smile that made the sun seem pale in comparison. "Harrison, Matthew Harrison, at your service." "Sophia Mitchell," she responded, accepting the bouquet with natural elegance. "And I thank you for the gesture, though it wasn't necessary. I know how to defend my own interests." "I have no doubt about that, Miss Mitchell. But defending yourself doesn't mean you have to do it alone." They walked together through the fair for 3 hours, talking about everything and nothing. Sophia told him she lived on a small farm with her parents, that she had finished high school with the best grades in her class, that she dreamed of studying to become a teacher, but the family's economy didn't allow it. Matthew told her about his studies, his plans for the future, his sense of emptiness, despite having everything money could buy. "Do you know what I like most about you, Mr. Harrison?" she asked when the sun began to set. "I have no idea, but I hope you'll tell me. That you look me in the eyes when I speak. Most men look at my dress, my hands, anything except my eyes, as if they feared discovering that there's a real person in there." Matthew stopped in the middle of the path and gently took her hands. "Sophia Mitchell, I don't fear discovering who you really are. In fact, I sense that knowing you will be the most important adventure of my life." 3 months later, they were engaged. Matthew had formally asked for her hand from Mr. James, Sophia's father, in a traditional ceremony that had moved Mrs. Rose to tears. The Mitchells were humble but honorable people, workers from sunrise to sunset, who had raised their daughter with solid values and unconditional love. "My Sophia is a treasure, Mr. Matthew," James had told him the night he officially accepted the engagement. "But we don't want her in a family that will see her as less for not having money. If your parents aren't going to accept her as an equal, it's better that things end here." "Mr. James," Matthew had responded with absolute sincerity, "my family will learn to love her as I love her. And if they don't, then I'll have to choose between them and my happiness. And I already know what my choice will be." How naive he had been. How terribly naive. Matthew opened his eyes in the present, feeling the familiar weight of guilt in his chest. He had made that promise with all his heart, truly believing that love could conquer any obstacle. He hadn't calculated the cruelty his own family was capable of when their interests were at stake. He got up from the armchair and walked to the window, observing the increasingly dark clouds gathering on the horizon. The storm was approaching, like that terrible storm in March 1972 that had changed his life forever. His parents had waited patiently until the engagement was public, until the wedding invitations were printed, until Matthew was so in love that it would be impossible for him to think clearly. Then they attacked with the surgical precision of those who had built fortunes destroying others. "Son," his father David had told him in the family library, with that cold voice he used for the dirtiest business, "we've investigated your fiancé's family. Dad, I already told you I don't care that they don't have money. I have enough for both of us." "It's not just about money, Matthew. It's about reputation, lineage, what our family represents in this society." His mother Catherine had entered then, carrying a manila folder that she deposited on the desk like a death sentence. "Miss Mitchell isn't the angel you pretend she is," she had said with venom in her voice. "Here's the proof." Inside the folder were blurry photographs, falsified documents, testimonies from supposed witnesses who swore they had seen Sophia in compromising situations. Matthew knew, in the depths of his heart, that it was all lies. He knew Sophia better than himself, knew she was incapable of the dishonesty those papers suggested, but his parents weren't finished. "If you insist on marrying that farm girl," David had continued, "we won't just disinherit you. We'll make sure the Mitchell farm is foreclosed. We've lent them money through intermediaries, and we can demand immediate payment whenever we want. We'll leave them in complete ruin, Matthew. Complete ruin. Besides, Catherine had added with calculated cruelty, we've already spoken with her. Matthew's heart had stopped. What do you mean? We offered her $50,000 to disappear from your life, and she accepted them, son. She accepted them without hesitation. Matthew had felt the world collapse around him. $50,000 was a fortune for a family like the Mitchells. More money than they could see in 10 years of honest work. That's a lie, he had whispered. Ask her yourself, his mother had challenged. Go find her. Discover if she's still in town or if she's already left with her money. Matthew had run to the Mitchell farm like a possessed man, with his heart beating so hard he feared it would explode. He found the house empty, windows closed, a for sale sign nailed to the front door. Neighbors told him the family had left that very morning, with all their belongings loaded in a borrowed truck. No one knew where they had gone. No one had explanations. Matthew had waited a week, 2 weeks, a month. No letter, no message, no explanation. Only the cruelest silence he had ever experienced. And slowly, painfully, he had begun to believe that maybe his parents were right, that maybe Sophia had chosen money over love, that maybe it had all been a perfectly orchestrated performance to trap the son of a wealthy family. 2 years later, destroyed inside but functioning through inertia, he had married Grace Thompson, the daughter of another prominent family, a good, decent woman who deserved a husband who would love her completely, and who instead received a man whose heart had been buried on an abandoned farm along with his dreams of happiness. Now, in the silence of his study, Matthew wondered for the first time in decades if he had made the biggest mistake of his life by not searching for her more intensely, by not fighting more fiercely for the truth. Sophia, he whispered toward the storm clouds, if you loved me as you said, why didn't you give me the chance to fight for us? The wind began to whistle through the garden trees, as if it were the answer to a question that would arrive 50 years too late. The rain pounded the study windows with increasing intensity, creating hypnotic patterns that distracted Matthew from his reading. He had tried to immerse himself in Tolstoy's pages, seeking in the master's words some comfort for his restless soul. But the stories of love and loss only intensified his melancholy. He closed the book with a sigh and headed to the kitchen to prepare his solitary lunch. The routine calmed him. Opening the refrigerator, taking out ingredients for a simple sandwich, heating a cup of coffee in the microwave that Robert had insisted on buying him the previous year, mechanical gestures that filled the empty minutes of a day that stretched endlessly like all the days of the past 7 years. While cutting slices of bread, the telephone rang again. This time it was Anne, his younger sister, calling from Miami where she had lived with her husband for 30 years. Matthew, brother, how are you? Surviving, Anne, as always. I don't like how you sound. Robert told me you're leaving the house less and less. That can't be good for you. Matthew sighed, slowly chewing his sandwich. Anne had inherited the family tendency to want to control other people's lives, though in her case it was born from genuine concern and not malice like had happened with their parents. Anne, I'm 78 years old. If I want to spend my days at home, reading and remembering, it's my right. Remembering isn't wrong, brother. But living only in the past is. And what alternative do you suggest? That I go out looking for a girlfriend at my age? That I sign up for senior citizen dance classes? Anne laughed, but there was real concern in her voice when she responded. I suggest you stop punishing yourself for decisions you made 50 years ago. Mom and Dad are dead. Matthew, they can't keep controlling your life from the grave. The conversation ended, as those family conversations always ended, with vague promises to visit soon and the mutual certainty that time would continue passing without significant changes. Matthew hung up the phone and returned to his study, where the rain had intensified until it became a complete thunderstorm. Lightning dramatically illuminated the neglected garden, revealing for moments the wild beauty that had grown without human supervision. The wild grass swayed violently under the wind, as if dancing a primitive dance that spoke of forces more powerful than human will. Matthew poured himself a double whiskey and settled into his favorite armchair, contemplating the natural spectacle with a mixture of admiration and melancholy. Storms always made him remember that night in March 1972, the last time he had spoken with Sophia before she disappeared from his life forever. They had had an argument, their first real argument as an engaged couple. His parents had begun to pressure him subtly about the wedding date, suggesting that maybe it would be prudent to wait a bit longer, to get to know each other better before taking such a definitive step. Matthew had reacted with the arrogance of a young man in love who believed the world should adapt to his desires. "Why can't we get married tomorrow?" he had asked Sophia as they walked under the light rain that was beginning to fall. "Why do we have to wait for my family to decide it's the appropriate time?" "Because marriage isn't just about two people, Matthew," she had responded with a wisdom that now, decades later, he recognized as superior to his own. "It's the union of two families, two ways of life, and if your family doesn't really accept me, our marriage will begin with a wound that can become infected over time. My family will accept you, I promise you. And if they don't?" Matthew had stopped under the rain, taking her hands with a passion he believed eternal. "Then we'll choose to create our own family, you and I, and the children God may bless us with. We don't need anyone else's approval to be happy." Sophia had smiled, but there was sadness in her honey-colored eyes. "Oh, my dear Matthew, you're so good, so noble, but you're also too young to understand what it really means to choose between family and love. Do you understand it? I hope I never have to find out." But she had had to find out, hadn't she? She had had to face the choice that he, cowardly, had never had the courage to make. She had chosen to protect her family by accepting the money and disappearing, saving him from disinheritance and family conflict. Or at least that was the version Matthew had repeated to himself for 50 years to be able to live with himself. He got up abruptly from the armchair, agitated by thoughts he hadn't allowed to flourish in decades. The whiskey burned in his stomach, mixing with an acidity that had nothing to do with the drink, but with something much deeper and more complex. What if his parents had lied? What if they had never offered money to Sophia? What if she had disappeared for completely different reasons, reasons he had never bothered to investigate, because it was easier to believe in betrayal than face the possibility that he had made the biggest mistake of his life? "No," he told himself aloud, trying to stop that line of thinking before it destroyed him. "It's over. It doesn't matter anymore. Sophia must be close to 75 now. She's probably married, has children, grandchildren, a complete life she built without me." But doubt, once released after decades of repression, was like water filtering through a crack, impossible to stop, capable of eroding even the most solid foundations. He walked to the window and pressed his forehead against the cold glass, watching how the rain turned his reflection into something blurry and unrecognizable. Somewhere in America, maybe in a modest house surrounded by family, maybe Sophia was also watching the storm and remembering an arrogant young man who had promised to love her forever. Did she ever think of him? Did she ever wonder what would have happened if circumstances had been different, or had she achieved what he never could, truly forget and build a full life with someone else? A particularly intense lightning bolt illuminated the entire garden, immediately followed by thunder that made the window glass vibrate. The storm was directly over the mansion now, and Matthew felt a strange sensation of expectation, as if the weather were a metaphor for something that was about to change in his ordered and predictable life. How ridiculous, he murmured, moving away from the window. "At my age, believing in presentiments like a superstitious old woman." But as he prepared for his afternoon nap, he couldn't shake the feeling that this storm was different. That something in the air had changed, as if destiny were rearranging the pieces of a puzzle it had been assembling for decades. He lay down on the study sofa, closing his eyes while the rain continued its hypnotic symphony against the windows. And for the first time in years, he fell asleep without taking his anxiety pills, rocking toward sleep with the strange certainty that when he woke up, something in his world would have changed forever. 50 miles from the mansion where Matthew dozed to the rhythm of the rain, Sophia Mitchell walked slowly through the cobblestone streets of her neighborhood, struggling against the wind that threatened to tear the broken umbrella from her hands. At 75 years old, each step was a small victory against time and circumstances that had conspired to bring her to this moment of silent desperation. Her small one-bedroom apartment was behind her, with the eviction notice stuck to the door like a sentence that gave her exactly 15 days to find the rent money or look for a new place to live. But where could a woman her age go, with a pension that barely covered the most basic medications and no nearby family who could help her? Ellen, her eldest daughter, had emigrated to Canada 5 years earlier after the textile factory where she worked closed permanently. Michael, her middle son, had moved to Denver looking for opportunities that never came, and now drove a taxi 12 hours a day just to pay rent for a room where he lived with his wife and 2 small children. Patricia, the youngest, had gotten a job as a nurse in Seattle, but her income barely allowed her to support herself while studying English at night. Sophia didn't blame them. The world had changed so much since she was young, when families stayed together regardless of economic difficulties. Now her children had to choose between helping her and feeding their own children, and she preferred to suffer in silence rather than become a burden to the people she loved most. Mrs. Mitchell, Mr. Thompson, the building owner, had told her the previous week, "You know I respect you very much, but it's already 3 months behind. I have expenses to pay, and I can't continue being charitable." Charitable. As if the 40 years she had lived in that apartment, always punctual with her payments until Charles's health began to deteriorate, meant nothing. As if decades of being a model tenant could be erased by 3 months of economic difficulties. The savings of a lifetime had evaporated in Charles's last year of life, when his uncontrolled diabetes required expensive medications and frequent hospitalizations. Sophia had sold everything that had value: the gold earrings that had been her mother's, the wedding ring, even the Singer sewing machine with which she had supplemented the family income for 30 years, making clothes for the neighbors. And now she walked under the torrential rain, carrying in her plastic bag the last recommendation letters she had left. Letters written by former employers who certified her honesty, her dedication, her ability to work hard despite her age. Letters that were getting wet despite her efforts to protect them, as if even the weather conspired against her last hopes. The cleaning company where she had worked for 15 years had closed suddenly the previous month. Staff reduction, they had explained, difficult decisions in difficult times. They had given her an excellent recommendation letter and a handshake, but no additional pension, no severance that could help her survive while looking for another job. Who was going to hire a 75-year-old woman for domestic work? Who was going to trust that her arthritic hands could clean efficiently, that her back could withstand hours of being bent scrubbing floors and bathrooms? But she had to try. The alternative was too terrible to contemplate. She stopped in front of a store mirror and fixed her grey hair that the wind had disheveled. Her honey-colored eyes, though surrounded by wrinkles, still maintained the dignity that had been her hallmark throughout her life. Her navy blue dress, the most elegant she had left, was clean and well-ironed despite being made of cheap fabric. Her black shoes were polished to a shine, though the right sole had a small hole that let humidity in. Dignity, she told herself, as she had done thousands of times in the most difficult moments of her life. Whatever happens, never lose your dignity. It was a lesson she had learned the hardest way, 51 years ago, when she had to choose between her own heart and protecting her family. When she had to disappear from the life of the only man she had truly loved to save him from the destruction his own parents had promised if she didn't stay away from him. Matthew Harrison. After more than 5 decades, his name still had the power to make her heart skip a beat. How many times had she dreamed of explaining the truth to him, of telling him that she had never accepted any money, that she had preferred to leave with her family toward unknown lands, rather than allow the Harrisons to fulfill their threats to ruin the Mitchells. But time had passed, and Matthew had surely married, had children, had built the prosperous life his family had planned for him. He probably didn't even remember the naive farm girl who had believed, for a brief and beautiful moment, that love could conquer class differences. The rain intensified, forcing her to seek shelter under the awning of a closed bakery. From there, she could see the mansions of the elegant neighborhood that had been her destination that afternoon. Enormous houses with perfect gardens and expensive cars parked in cobblestone driveways. The world where she had dreamed of living when she was young and naive, when she believed that love was enough to jump any abyss. One of those mansions in particular caught her attention. It was the largest on the block, with colonial American architecture that vaguely reminded her of the plantations she had seen in old photographs. The windows were warmly lit, suggesting life and comfort inside. There was something about that house that gave her a strange sensation, as if it was significant in some way she couldn't explain. "Maybe there," she murmured, observing the elegant facade. "Maybe the people who live in a house like that have the heart to understand that an older woman can work honestly in exchange for an opportunity." She waited for the rain to lighten slightly and left her shelter, walking with determination toward the mansion that had caught her attention. With each step, she mentally repeated the words she had rehearsed for days. "Good morning, Mom. I'm here to ask if you need domestic help. I have excellent references and am willing to work for any fair salary." She wouldn't ask for charity. She would never ask for charity. She would offer honest work in exchange for the opportunity to keep her dignity intact while earning enough to pay her rent and buy food. As she approached the main door of the mansion, Sophia felt a strange mixture of hope and nervousness. It was as if destiny were guiding her toward something important, toward a moment that would change everything. But she dismissed those thoughts as fantasies of a desperate mind. Destiny, if it existed, had already played its cruelest card 50 years ago. All she could do now was knock on that door, offer her services with humility but without begging, and hope that whoever lived in that beautiful house had the kindness to give her an opportunity. The wind carried the aroma of garden flowers to her, mixed with the smell of rain on earth. For a moment, just a moment, she felt young again, full of hope and possibilities. Then she breathed deeply, headed toward the door, and raised her hand to ring the bell that would change her life forever. The rain had become a dense curtain that blurred the contours of the world, transforming the afternoon into something unreal and mysterious. Sophia walked slowly along the stone path leading to the mansion's main door, feeling that each step brought her closer not only to a possible solution for her immediate problems, but to something much larger and more significant that she couldn't understand yet. Her shoes splashed softly in the puddles that had formed between the pathstones, and the rhythmic sound of her steps mixed with the constant drumming of rain on the leaves of the trees flanking the way. The mansion's garden, though neglected, maintained a wild beauty that reminded her of the fields of her childhood, when the world seemed full of infinite possibilities. "Courage, Sophia," she told herself, adjusting the plastic bag where she carried her wet recommendation letters. You've survived worse things than this. You've survived losing the love of your life, raising 3 children practically alone while Charles worked 2 jobs, caring for a sick husband for years. You can survive knocking on a door and asking for work. But there was something about that specific house that disturbed her in an inexplicable way. It wasn't fear, exactly, but a sensation of recognition that made no logical sense. As if she had been there before, as if she had walked that path in dreams or another life. She stopped for a moment, observing the lit windows, wondering what kind of person would live alone in such a large mansion, because she was sure that whoever lived there was alone. There was no evidence of a family, no toys in the garden, no multiple cars in the driveway, no kind of bustling activity that characterized houses where children or large families lived. There was only a deep quiet, interrupted only by the sound of rain and occasionally by the echo of classical music that filtered weakly from inside. As she approached the door, Sophia thought about the other houses she had visited that week. At the first, an elegant middle-aged woman had opened the door, had listened to her request with cold courtesy, and had responded, "I'm sorry, but we prefer younger staff." At the second, they hadn't even opened the door. They had just shouted from inside that they didn't need anything. At the third, an older man had been kind but direct. "Ma'am, with all respect, you're old enough to be my mother. It wouldn't be appropriate for you to work in my house." Each rejection had been a small death, a reminder that in a society that valued youth over experience, a 75-year-old woman was little more than invisible. But Sophia had learned long ago that invisibility could be a disguised blessing. Invisible people could hear important conversations, could observe without being observed, could understand family dynamics in ways that escaped those who were at the center of attention. She stopped in front of the main door, a work of art in carved wood with intricate details that spoke of expert craftsmen and abundant money. The doorbell was polished bronze, and next to the door was a small rose garden that, despite the evident abandonment, still produced beautiful flowers that perfumed the air with their sweet and nostalgic fragrance. For some reason, those roses calmed her. Her mother had always said that roses were a sign that good-hearted people lived in a house, because only people who truly knew love could make the most beautiful roses bloom. "All right, Mum," she whispered toward the grey sky. "If you're right about the roses, maybe this time will be different." She raised her hand toward the doorbell, but stopped at the last moment. What was she going to say exactly? How was she going to explain her situation without sounding desperate? How was she going to convince a stranger that, despite her age, she still had value as a worker? She decided to be completely honest. Honesty had been her guide throughout her life, even when it had cost her more than she could afford to lose. "Good morning," she rehearsed quietly. "My name is Sophia Mitchell, and I'm here to ask if by chance you need domestic help. I know my age may be a concern, but I have excellent references, and am willing to work very hard for any salary you consider fair." No, that sounded too rehearsed, too desperate. "Excuse the bother," she tried again. "I was wondering if you might need help with cleaning or cooking. I've worked in private homes for many years, and—" That didn't work either. It sounded like she was reciting a resume. Finally, she decided that the best words would be those that came naturally from her heart in the moment. She breathed deeply, feeling the aroma of roses mix with the smell of rain and wet earth, and pressed the doorbell. The sound resonated inside the house with an elegant and prolonged melody, very different from the cheap and strident doorbells of the apartments where she had lived for decades. She waited, counting slowly to 10 and then to 20. Maybe no one was home. Maybe she should return at another time. But then she heard footsteps, slow but firm footsteps approaching the door. The sound of expensive shoes on marble floors. She quickly smoothed her wet hair, straightened as much as her arthritic back allowed, and prepared her best smile. warm but respectful, hopeful but not begging. The door opened slowly, and Sophia found herself face to face with an older man, elegantly dressed in grey dress pants and an impeccably ironed white shirt. He had completely white hair, perfectly combed back, and eyes of an intense blue that seemed tired but intelligent. He was tall, with distinguished bearing, and there was something in his way of moving that suggested decades of authority and success. But what most impacted Sophia wasn't his elegance or his evident wealth. It was something in his expression, a deep sadness that she recognized immediately because she had seen it in her own mirror for years. It was the expression of someone who had lost something important and had never stopped looking for it. "Yes?" asked the man with an educated but cautious voice. His eyes studied her quickly, noting her modest but clean clothes, her dignified posture despite the evidently difficult circumstances. Sophia opened her mouth to pronounce the words she had rehearsed, but something strange happened. The man's voice had sounded familiar in a way she couldn't explain. It wasn't the superficial familiarity of someone who looks like another person you know, but something deeper, more disturbing. "Excuse me, sir," she managed to say finally, with a voice slightly trembling from cold and rain. "I'm here to ask if by chance you need domestic help, cooking, cleaning, anything I might be useful for." The man frowned slightly, not with annoyance, but with something that seemed like confusion. There was something in her voice, in her way of speaking, that was strangely familiar to him too. "Your name?" he asked, taking a step forward. "Sophia," she responded automatically. "Sophia Mitchell." The man remained completely still, as if he had received a physical blow. His blue eyes opened wide, and his face visibly paled. For a moment that seemed eternal, they stared at each other, while the rain continued falling around them, and the world seemed to have stopped completely. "Dear God," the man whispered with a barely audible voice, "it can't be. It's not possible." And then, with a voice that Sophia hadn't heard in 51 years, but that she recognized instantly, he pronounced her name like an impossible question, like a prayer he had never stopped praying. "Sophia? Sophia Mitchell?" The world collapsed and rebuilt itself in a single instant. Time folded in on itself, erasing decades of separation and pain. Sophia felt her legs weaken, felt her heart stop, and then begin beating with a force she hadn't felt since she was 22 years old. "Matthew," she whispered, with tears mixing with rain on her face. "My dear Matthew." And in that moment, 51 years after destiny had cruelly separated them, two souls that had never stopped searching for each other had finally found each other. Time suspended itself as if the universe had decided to stop to witness the impossible. Matthew and Sophia looked at each other across the door threshold, separated by barely a meter of distance, but united by a recognition that transcended decades, wrinkles, the changes that life had carved in their faces and hearts. "It can't be real," Matthew murmured, with a voice broken by emotion. "I've dreamed of you so many times that maybe I've gone crazy, and now I'm hallucinating." Sophia extended a trembling hand toward him, stopping a few centimeters from his face. Her fingers trembled in the air, not daring to touch what might vanish, like all the illusions that had fed her lonely nights for half a century. "It's you," she whispered with amazement. "It's really you. I've looked for you in every face for 50 years. Matthew Harrison. In every older man I saw on the street, in every photograph in the newspapers, wondering if it would be you, if you would have aged well, if you would still have those blue eyes that were my downfall." The rain continued falling intensely, soaking Sophia's dress and dripping from Matthew's hair, but neither seemed to notice. They were lost in the miracle of reunion, in the impossibility made reality of being face to face after an entire lifetime of separation. "You're soaked," Matthew said suddenly, as if waking from a trance. "Please come in. Come in before you get sick." He stepped aside, gesturing toward the mansion's interior with an automatic courtesy he had learned in decades of elegant social interactions. But his eyes never left her, as if he feared she would disappear if he blinked. Sophia hesitated for a moment. After so many years, after everything that had happened, was it appropriate to enter his house? What would people say if they knew that a woman her age was visiting alone with a widowed man? But then she remembered that she no longer had a reputation to protect, that she no longer had anything to lose except the opportunity to understand, finally, what had really happened between them. "Thank you," she said simply, and crossed the threshold into the mansion's interior. The difference between the rainy exterior and the warm, dry interior was immediately comforting. Sophia found herself in an elegant foyer, with marble floors that reflected the light from a crystal chandelier, walls decorated with fine art, and a curved staircase that went up to the second floor. It was exactly the kind of house where she had dreamed of living when she was young, when she believed that Matthew's love would take her to a world of beauty and comfort. "Let me help you with that," Matthew said, approaching to take her broken umbrella and wet plastic bag. Their fingers brushed briefly when she handed him her belongings, and both felt an electric shock that seemed to connect them directly with their lost youth. "You're cold," he observed, noticing how she trembled slightly. "I'm going to bring you a towel and something hot to drink. Do you still like chamomile tea?" The question took her by surprise. After so many years, he remembered her preference for chamomile tea, remembered the afternoons they had spent together drinking tea and talking about their dreams for the future. "Yes," she responded, with a smile that completely transformed her face, making her look for a moment like the 22-year-old girl he had loved with all his heart. "I still like chamomile tea." Matthew indicated that she should follow him to the main living room, a large and elegant space dominated by a stone fireplace and furnished with leather sofas and hand-carved wooden tables. The walls were covered with books and photographs, and there was a grand piano in a corner that obviously hadn't been played in years. "Please, sit down," he said, pointing to the sofa closest to the fireplace. "I'm going to light the fire and prepare the tea. Don't leave, will you? You're not going to disappear again." There was a desperate vulnerability in his voice that broke Sophia's heart. For all these years, he had believed that she had abandoned him voluntarily, that she had chosen money over love. He had no idea of the truth, didn't know about the blackmail, the threats, the sacrifice she had made to protect him. "I'm not going to leave," she promised him, sitting carefully on the edge of the sofa. "I'm not going to leave until we can talk about everything that happened." Matthew nodded and headed quickly toward the kitchen, but he stopped at the door and turned toward her once more, as if he needed visual confirmation that she was really there. 50 years, he said, with a voice rough with emotion. 50 years waiting for this moment, dreaming about what I would say to you if I ever saw you again. And now that you're here, I can't find the words." Sophia got up from the sofa and walked toward him, stopping an arm's length away. This time she didn't hesitate to extend her hand and gently touch his cheek, feeling the wrinkled but still warm skin, the perfectly shaved beard, the solid and undeniable reality of the man she had loved since she was 22 years old. "We have time," she told him tenderly. "We have all the time in the world to find the right words. But first, let me tell you what I've wanted to tell you for 50 years. I never stopped loving you, Matthew Harrison. Not a single day of my life did I stop loving you." Tears began to roll down Matthew's cheeks, tears he had repressed for decades of wounded pride and broken heart. He covered his face with his hands, and his shoulders began to tremble with the force of an emotion too large to be contained. "Me neither," he managed to say between sobs. "I never stopped loving you. I married another woman, had a life, but I never stopped loving you. I looked for you in every face, heard your voice in every song, dreamed of you every night for 50 years. Sophia couldn't contain herself any longer. She closed the distance between them and hugged him, feeling how his body fit perfectly against hers, as if they had been designed to complement each other. Matthew surrounded her with his arms, holding her against his chest as if he feared she would vanish. They stayed like that for long minutes, crying together, releasing decades of pain and loneliness, rediscovering the miracle of being complete for the first time in half a century. Outside, the storm continued roaring, but inside they had found the peace they had been searching for all their lives. "My love," Matthew whispered against her grey hair. "My lost love, my found love. My life," she responded, using the words of endearment she had saved for him for 50 years. "My entire life has been a wait to return to you." And while they embraced in the elegant living room of the mansion, while the fireplace lit automatically and the tea waited to be prepared, two hearts that had never stopped beating in unison had finally found their way back home. When they finally separated from the embrace that had lasted an eternity and barely an instant, Matthew and Sophia stood in the center of the living room, looking at each other with a mixture of amazement and shyness that was almost adolescent. Tears still glistened on their cheeks, but now there was something more in their eyes, the desperate need to understand, to fill the gaps of 50 years with words that had been waiting to be spoken for half a century. "Sit down, please," Matthew murmured, his voice still hoarse with emotion. "Let me prepare that tea and bring you something dry to change into. I can't allow you to get sick now that—" He stopped mid-sentence, as if the words were too dangerous to pronounce. Now that he had found her again, now that the miracle had occurred, now that he had a second chance he hadn't believed possible. "Now that destiny has given us another opportunity," Sophia completed softly, guessing his thoughts as if the 50 years of separation had never existed. "Go, Matthew. I'll be here when you return. I promise you." He nodded and headed toward the stairs. But every few steps he stopped and turned to look at her, as if he needed constant visual confirmation that she wasn't a hallucination born from so many nights of loneliness. Sophia understood his fear because she shared it. For decades, she had dreamed of this moment, had imagined what she would say, how she would react, what she would feel upon seeing him again. But nothing she had imagined came close to the overwhelming reality of being really here, in his house, breathing the same air as him. While she waited, Sophia walked slowly through the living room, observing the details that spoke of the life Matthew had built without her. The framed photographs on the fireplace mantel showed a distinguished man beside an elegant woman with a gentle smile. Grace, she supposed, feeling a strange pang that wasn't exactly jealousy, but something more complex. The understanding that he had tried to be happy, that he had attempted to build a complete life with someone else. She was a good woman, Matthew's voice said from the stairs. He had returned with a navy blue silk robe and a fluffy towel, and had seen her contemplating the photographs. Grace was a devoted wife, a loving mother to Robert, our adopted son. She accompanied me for 41 years with patience and kindness. He approached her and handed her the robe, their fingers touching again in the exchange. "But she was never you," he added with brutal honesty, "and she knew it. We never discussed it openly, but she knew there was a part of my heart I couldn't give her because it belonged to someone who had disappeared from my life." Sophia took the robe in her hands, feeling the silk softness against her skin roughened by work. "Was she happy with you?" she asked, needing to know that her sacrifice hadn't been completely in vain, that at least one person had found some peace in the destruction of their first love. "As happy as she could be married to a man who could never love her completely," Matthew responded sadly. "I gave her respect, companionship, security, fidelity, but I could never give her the passion she deserved. That had died with you." Sophia closed her eyes, feeling the weight of intertwined lives, of decisions that had affected not only the two of them, but all the people who had surrounded them during these decades. "Change," he said gently. "The bathroom is at the end of the hallway. When you return, we'll talk about everything that happened, about everything we didn't say, about everything we lost, and maybe about what we can still recover." Sophia nodded and headed toward the bathroom, walking through elegant hallways, decorated with art that cost more than she had earned in entire years. But instead of feeling intimidated, she felt strangely at home, as if she had been walking toward this house, toward this moment, her entire life. In the marble bathroom, while she took off her soaked dress and wrapped herself in the silk robe that smelled faintly of lavender and him, Sophia looked at herself in the mirror and saw reflected not only the 75-year-old woman she was now, but also the 22-year-old girl who had loved Matthew Harrison with the intensity of someone who believes love can conquer any obstacle. "Are you ready for this?" she asked her reflection. "Are you ready to open wounds that never completely healed? Are you ready to tell him the truth after so much time?" Her reflection didn't answer, but her honey-colored eyes shone with the same determination she had had when she decided to sacrifice her happiness to protect the family she loved. If she had been strong enough to give him up once, she would be strong enough to face the consequences of that decision now. When she returned to the living room, she found that Matthew had lit the fireplace and had prepared a tray with steaming chamomile tea and small sandwiches cut into perfect triangles. He was sitting on one of the sofas with his hands interlaced and his gaze lost in the flames dancing in the fireplace. "Thank you," she said, settling on the opposite sofa. The physical distance seemed necessary to be able to speak clearly. Being too close to him clouded her ability to think rationally. "Where do we start?" Matthew asked, pouring tea with hands that trembled slightly. "How do we fill 50 years of emptiness with a few hours of conversation?" "Let's start with the most important thing," Sophia responded, taking the cup in her hands and feeling how the warmth spread through her numb fingers. "Let's start with the truth you never could hear, and that I never could say." Matthew looked up at her, and in his blue eyes she saw the same pain that had tormented him for decades, the same question that had kept him awake during countless lonely nights. "Tell me," he whispered. "Tell me why you abandoned me. Tell me why you accepted my parents' money. Tell me why you disappeared without a word, without an explanation, without giving me the chance to fight for us." Sophia breathed deeply, preparing to pronounce the words she had mentally rehearsed thousands of times but had never been able to say aloud. "I never accepted money from your parents, Matthew," she said with a clear and firm voice. "I never abandoned you by choice. And never, not for a second, did I stop loving you with all my heart." The silence that followed her words was so deep they could hear the crackling of wood in the fireplace, the drumming of rain against the windows, the accelerated beating of their own hearts. "Then," Matthew said finally, with a barely audible voice, "what really happened?" And Sophia began to tell the story she had kept secret for 51 years, the story of a love that had been destroyed not by betrayal, but by the cruelty of those who believed money gave them the right to control other people's lives. "It was a Tuesday in March," Sophia began, with a voice loaded with a sadness that time had made deeper, but no less painful. "I remember the exact day, because it was the day we had planned to go see the land where we wanted to build our house. I was preparing my best clothes when they arrived at the farm." Matthew leaned forward, every muscle in his body tense with anticipation and dread. After 50 years, he was finally going to hear the version of the story his parents had never allowed him to know. "They arrived in 3 black cars," Sophia continued, closing her eyes as if she could see the scene unfolding again before her. "Your father, your mother, and 4 men I had never seen before, but who had the appearance of people accustomed to solving problems in ways that weren't always legal." She stopped to take a sip of tea, and Matthew noticed that her hands trembled slightly around the cup. "My father was working in the field, My mother washing clothes at the river. I was alone in the house when they knocked on the door. When I opened it and saw your parents, my first thought was that they had come to talk about the wedding, maybe to get to know me better, or to discuss plans. But that's not what it was, Matthew murmured, though he already knew the answer. Your father didn't even greet me, Sophia said with a sad smile. He simply pushed the door open and entered, followed by your mother and the other men. They told me to sit down, as if I were in my own house by their permission. Matthew closed his eyes, feeling a wave of shame for his family's actions that threatened to overwhelm him. What did they tell you exactly? Your mother spoke first. She told me they had investigated my family, that they knew my parents owed money to various lenders, that they knew every detail of our economic situation, which was true, of course. Dad had had to borrow money to buy seeds after the previous year's bad harvest. Sophia got up from the sofa and walked to the window, observing the rain that continued falling relentlessly. Then your father took out a folder full of documents, loan contracts I had never seen, with impossible interest rates and due dates that had passed months ago. When I asked him what all that meant, he smiled in a way that chilled my blood. The loans were real, she continued, without turning toward Matthew. But the original lenders had sold the debts to companies controlled by your family. Overnight, my father had gone from owing $5,000 with reasonable monthly payments to owing $50,000 with immediate payment due. Matthew felt his stomach turn. He knew his father's business tactics, had seen how he destroyed competitors and eliminated obstacles, but he had never imagined he would use those methods against the family of the woman he loved. Miss Mitchell, Sophia recited, imitating David Harrison's cold voice. Your family can pay this debt immediately, or we can proceed with foreclosure of the property and everything it contains. Of course, we'll also file criminal charges for debt evasion, which means your father will spend the next 5 years in prison. My God, Matthew whispered, but then your mother intervened with a smile that was pure poison. She told me there was an alternative, that your family was generous and willing to forgive all debts, plus an additional payment of $20,000 if I did one thing. Sophia turned toward him, and Matthew saw in her eyes the reflection of the terror she had felt that March afternoon, 50 years ago. Disappear from our son's life, she told me. Leave him free so he can marry someone from his own social class. Make him believe you abandoned him for money. Break his heart once so he can move on. No, Matthew murmured, shaking his head as if he could change the past with his denial. No, they couldn't have asked you that. I had 5 minutes to decide, Sophia continued implacably. 5 minutes to choose between my happiness and my family's survival. 5 minutes to decide if my love for you was more important than my love for my parents. She walked back to the sofa and sat in front of him, taking his hands in hers. I chose my family, Matthew. I chose to save my parents from ruin and prison. I chose to break my own heart so yours could, eventually, heal with someone else. Tears flowed freely down Matthew's cheeks now, tears of pain for what she had suffered, of fury at his parents' cruelty, of regret for not having fought harder to find the truth. But they told me you had accepted money, he managed to say. They told me you had taken $50,000 and disappeared. I never took a cent, Sophia responded firmly. I told them I would disappear from your life, that I would make you believe I didn't love you, but that I would never take money for breaking my own heart, that I wasn't merchandise that could be bought. Then why did my parents tell me you had accepted the money? Sophia's smile was bitter as hemlock, because they knew their son. They knew that if you believed they had forced me to leave you, you would fight them until your last breath. But if you believed I had betrayed you for money, you would feel too humiliated and hurt to look for me. The lie about the money wasn't to buy me, Matthew. It was to buy you. The silence that followed was so profound, it seemed sacred. Matthew processed the magnitude of the manipulation, the calculated cruelty with which his parents had destroyed not only his happiness, but also Sophia's, all to maintain their control over his life and fortune. "We packed that very night," Sophia continued softly. "My parents never knew why we had to leave so suddenly. I told them there had been a misunderstanding with your family, that it was better we moved to another state to avoid problems. Dad sold the farm for a fraction of its real value, and we left for Michigan, where we had distant family. And you never came back. You never tried to contact me. How could I? I knew that if I returned, if I tried to explain the truth to you, your parents would fulfill their threats, my family would have been destroyed, and you would have had to choose between them and me. I couldn't put you in that position, Matthew. I loved you too much to make you carry that guilt." Matthew covered his face with his hands, trying to assimilate the full weight of what he had lost, of the years that had been stolen not by fate or bad luck, but by human malice in its purest form. 50 years, he murmured. 50 years hating you for abandoning me, when in reality you had been forced to sacrifice your happiness to protect your family. 50 years, Sophia repeated, wondering if you had managed to be happy with the life your family had planned for you. 50 years, hoping that at least one person had found peace in all this tragedy. They looked at each other across the space that separated them, seeing not only the elderly people they were now, but also the young people they had been, the lovers who never had the chance to grow old together, the lives they could have lived if love had been stronger than greed and control. Matthew stood up abruptly from the sofa, walking toward the fireplace like a caged animal, with his hands clenched into fists and his face contorted by a fury that had been accumulating for 50 years without knowing it had a legitimate target. "The bastards," he murmured, and then, louder, "The bastards, how could they be so cruel? How could they destroy 2 lives just to maintain their control over money?" Sophia watched him vent, understanding that he needed to process the fury before he could reach any other emotion. She had had 50 years to process her anger. He was feeling everything for the first time. "They didn't just destroy our lives, Matthew," she said softly. "They also destroyed Grace's. She married a man who could never love her completely, and my children's, who grew up with a father who wasn't their biological father because I had to marry out of necessity, not love." Matthew stopped dead, turning toward her with wide eyes. "What do you mean you had to marry out of necessity?" Sophia breathed deeply, preparing to reveal another layer of the tragedy that had been her life without him. "When we arrived in Michigan, I discovered I was pregnant," she said, with a barely audible voice. "Pregnant with your child, Matthew." The world stopped. Matthew felt his legs give way and had to lean against the fireplace mantel to keep from falling. "What?" he whispered. "Ellen isn't Charles's daughter," Sophia continued, with tears rolling down her cheeks, but with a firm voice. "Ellen is your daughter, our daughter, the daughter you never knew existed." Matthew slowly slid down until he was sitting on the floor, leaning against the wall, with his gaze lost in emptiness, while he processed this revelation that changed everything he thought he knew about his life. "A daughter," he murmured. "I have a daughter. When I realized I was pregnant, I knew I couldn't raise a baby alone without ruining my family's reputation and condemning my child to grow up as illegitimate," Sophia explained. "Charles Williams was a good man who worked on the farm where Dad had gotten a job. He was a widower, wanting to have a family again. When I explained my situation to him, he offered to marry me and give the baby his last name. Did he know she wasn't his daughter? He knew, and he never threw it in my face. He was a loving father to Ellen, and later to Michael and Patricia, when we decided it was better for her to have siblings so she wouldn't feel alone in the world." Matthew closed his eyes, seeing his entire life from a completely new perspective. He had not only lost the love of his life, he had lost the opportunity to know his own daughter, to raise her, to be present in the most important moments of her childhood and youth. "What is she like?" he asked with a broken voice. "Does she look like you or me?" "She has your eyes," Sophia responded with a smile through tears. "Those same blue eyes that made me fall in love when I was 22. And your intelligence, your way of analyzing problems before making decisions. She's a teacher, like I wanted to be. She lives in Canada now, working hard to build a better life for her own daughter." "My granddaughter," Matthew whispered. "I have a granddaughter I've never met." "Lucy?" "Her name is Lucy, and she's 28 years old. She's a nurse, single, completely dedicated to helping others. She has your kindness, Matthew, that tendency to put others' needs before your own." Matthew covered his face with his hands, sobbing with an intensity he hadn't experienced since Grace's death. But these weren't just tears of pain. They were tears of loss, regret, fury, but also of something he hadn't felt in decades: hope. "Does Ellen know who her real father is?" he asked finally. "She knows," Sophia responded. "I told her when she turned 18 she had the right to know the truth about her origins. But I also asked her never to try to contact you. I told her you had built a new life and she had no right to interfere in it." "And what did she say?" "She said she understood, but that she had always hoped to meet you someday, that she had always felt something was missing, that there was an emptiness in her life that Charles, good as he was, had never been able to completely fill." Matthew slowly got up from the floor and returned to the sofa. Sitting next to Sophia for the first time since they had begun this devastating conversation. 50 years, he said, taking her hands in his. 50 years when I could have been a father, grandfather. 50 years when Ellen could have had the economic security she deserved, when you wouldn't have had to struggle alone to raise 3 children. "Don't torture yourself with what-ifs," Sophia told him gently. "I've lived with those thoughts for half a century, and all they do is poison what little happiness one can find in the present." "But there's so much to recover," Matthew protested. "So much lost time, so many moments we'll never be able to live. Ellen's first steps, her first day of school, her graduation, her wedding. Did she get married?" "She married at 25, but divorced 3 years later. She said she couldn't find a man who really understood her, that she always felt something was missing in her relationships." The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Ellen had inherited not only her father's eyes, but also his inability to find complete love after losing the possibility of true love. "I want to meet her," Matthew said with an intensity that surprised both of them. "I want to meet my daughter, my granddaughter. I want to be part of their lives, if they'll let me. I want to somehow make up for the years we lost." "Matthew," Sophia said carefully, 50 years have passed. They've built their lives without you. You can't just appear and expect everything to be fixed like a romantic movie." "I know," he responded. "I know it will be complicated, that it will take time, that maybe we'll never be able to completely recover what we lost. But I have to try, Sophia. I have to try to build some kind of relationship with the family I never knew I had." They looked at each other in silence for a moment, both aware that they were standing on the threshold of something completely new and uncertain. The past had been revealed, the truth had been told, but the future remained an unknown territory full of possibilities and dangers. "There's something else you need to know," Sophia said finally. "Something about why I'm here today, why I knocked on your door asking for work." Matthew frowned, confused. "I thought it was coincidence. I thought destiny had guided you to my house without you knowing it was mine." "I didn't know it was your house," Sophia confirmed. "But it wasn't exactly coincidence that I was in your neighborhood looking for work, Ellen sends me money when she can, but with the economic crisis in Canada, it's been increasingly difficult for her. Michael and Patricia are also struggling. I lost my job 2 months ago. I'm behind on rent, and I have 2 weeks to find a way to pay or become homeless." The revelation hit Matthew like a physical punch. He had not only found the love of his life after 50 years, he had found her at her moment of greatest need, when she was on the verge of losing what little she had. "Never again," he said with a fierceness that surprised her. "Never again will you worry about money, food, having a roof over your head. Never again will you have to humiliate yourself asking strangers for work. That life is over for you, Sophia Mitchell. Matthew, you can't just solve my problems with money. Life doesn't work that way." "Why not?" he asked, genuinely confused. "I have more money than I could spend in what's left of my life. Ellen is my daughter. You're the woman I've loved for 50 years. Why can't I use my wealth to take care of my family?" The word family resonated between them like a bell, loaded with possibilities that neither had dared to contemplate when they began this conversation. "Is that what we are now?" Sophia asked softly. "Family." Matthew looked directly into her eyes, seeing in them the same honey-colored eyes that had captured his heart when he was 25, the same eyes that had been present in every one of his dreams for half a century. "If you want us to be," he responded, "if you give me the chance to make up for 50 years of losses, if you let me love you again, the way I should have loved you from the beginning." The silence that followed Matthew's words was charged with electricity, like the air before a storm. Sophia looked at him with a mixture of longing and terror, aware that she found herself at the most crucial moment of her life. For 50 years, she had dreamed of hearing those words, but now that she heard them, she felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they meant. "Matthew," she began slowly, choosing each word carefully. "We're not the same young people we were 50 years ago. We've lived entire lives, loved other people, made mistakes, suffered losses. We can't simply go back to where we were in 1972, as if nothing had happened." "I don't want to go back to the past," he responded with an intensity that surprised her. "I want to build a future. I want to take everything we've learned, everything we've suffered, all the wisdom we've gained over the years, and use it to create something new. Something that might be even more beautiful than what we had when we were young." Sophia got up from the sofa and walked to the window, watching how the rain had begun to lighten. The clouds were starting to separate, allowing some rays of sunlight to filter through the storm. "Do you know what hurts me most about all this?" she asked without turning toward him. "It's not the time we lost. It's not the opportunities we didn't have. What hurts me most is thinking about Grace." Matthew frowned, confused. "About Grace? She married you believing she had the chance to win your love completely. She woke up every morning for 41 years hoping that maybe that day would be the day you finally loved her like you loved me. And it never happened, did it?" The question was like a dagger in Matthew's heart. He had spent decades trying not to think too deeply about the injustice he had committed against Grace, about the half-empty marriage he had offered her. "I cared for her," he said finally. "I respected her deeply, enjoyed her company, worried about her well-being. But you're right, I could never love her as she deserved. There was always a part of my heart that was closed to her." "And now you want us to do the same," Sophia continued. "You want us to build a relationship on the foundations of 2 marriages that were, at best, incomplete. You want us to ignore the fact that Charles and Grace deserved more than what we gave them." Matthew got up and walked toward her, stopping just behind her but without touching her. "We can't change the past, Sophia. We can't resurrect our spouses and give them the complete love they deserved. The only thing we can do is honor their memory by living the rest of our lives with the greatest fullness possible." "And what if it's too late?" she asked, finally turning to look at him. "What if we've lost the ability to love completely? What if 50 years of living with incomplete love has damaged us in ways we can't repair?" "Then we'll find out together," he responded simply. Because the alternative is spending the rest of our lives wondering what would have happened if we had had the courage to try. Sophia studied his face, looking for signs of doubt or uncertainty, but only found the same determination she had seen in him when they were 22 and 25, and believed they could conquer the world together. "And Ellen, and the rest of my family?" she asked. "How do we explain to them that their mother, at 75, has decided to move in with a man she abandoned 50 years ago? We explain to them that true love has no expiration date," Matthew responded. "We explain to them that it's never too late to make the right decision. And if they don't understand immediately, we give them time to process it, like we need time to process all of this." Sophia closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision she was about to make. Throughout her life, she had been a practical woman who made decisions based on logic and responsibility. But for once, for the first time in 50 years, she wanted to make a decision based purely on what her heart told her was right. "What exactly are you suggesting?" she asked, opening her eyes to look at him directly. "I'm suggesting we don't waste another day," he responded, taking her hands in his. "I'm suggesting you stay here with me, not as a guest, but as the lady of the house. I'm suggesting we contact Ellen and explain the situation to her, that we help her economically and emotionally. I'm suggesting we get married, Sophia, as we should have married 50 years ago." The words hung in the air between them, enormous and full of implications that would change not only their lives, but the lives of all the people around them. "Are you asking me to marry you?" Sophia asked, barely able to believe what she was hearing. "I'm asking you to be my wife, my companion, my family," Matthew responded. "I'm asking you to give me the chance to love you as I should have loved you from the beginning. I'm asking you to build together the years we have left, however few or many they may be." Sophia felt tears begin to roll down her cheeks again, but this time they weren't tears of pain, but of something she hadn't felt in decades, pure and simple hope. "And if it doesn't work," she whispered, "and if we discover we've changed too much, that we're too different from the people we were when we fell in love, then we'll have tried," he responded, moving closer until he could feel her breath on his cheek. "We'll have had the courage to bet on love one more time, and that will be more than most people can say at the end of their lives." Sophia looked into his eyes, seeing in them not only the man she had loved for 50 years, but also the man he had become. Wiser, gentler, more aware of the real value of important things in life. "Yes," she whispered finally. "Yes, Matthew Harrison. I want to be your wife." And when he kissed her, softly at first and then with the passion of 5 decades of repressed love, both knew they weren't simply returning to the past. They were creating something completely new, a love that had been tested by time, purified by suffering, and strengthened by understanding how precious a second chance is. Outside, the storm had passed completely, and the sun shone through the windows, filling the living room with golden light that seemed to bless the miracle that had just occurred. The following days passed in a haze of endless conversations, continuous revelations, and the delicate task of rebuilding not just a relationship, but an entire family that had been fragmented by decades of forced separation. Matthew had insisted that Sophia move immediately to the mansion, cancelling her rental contract and sending Robert to collect her few belongings from the small apartment that had been her home for so many years. Robert had received the news with a mixture of shock, concern, and she'd eventually genuine joy upon seeing his adoptive father more animated than he had been in years. The transformation in Matthew was notable. He walked more upright, smiled frequently, and had an energy in him that Robert hadn't seen since before Grace's death. "Dad," Robert had told him during a private conversation in the study, "I understand this woman was important to you a long time ago, but are you sure this isn't just nostalgia? Are you sure you really know the person she's become after 50 years? Matthew had smiled with patience, understanding his son's concern, but also sure in a way he hadn't felt in decades. "Robert, son, there are loves that transcend time. There are connections that can't be broken by years or circumstances. What I feel for Sophia isn't nostalgia, it's recognition. It's as if I had been living with half my soul for 50 years and had finally found the missing part." Meanwhile, Sophia had spent hours on the phone with Ellen, carefully explaining the situation and preparing her to meet the father she had never known. The conversation had been emotional and complex, full of tears, questions, and a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "Mom," Ellen had said from her apartment in Vancouver, "all my life I've dreamed of meeting my biological father, but I've also built my life assuming it would never happen. Are you sure this is right? Are you sure he really wants to be part of our lives and isn't just acting out of guilt?" "Daughter," Sophia had responded, "I've seen how he looks at you in the photographs I showed him. I've seen how he cries when we talk about you. His love for you is real, even though he just discovered you exist. Give me time for you to get to know each other gradually. Give me the chance to build the bridge between you." Ellen had agreed to fly to Georgia to meet Matthew, bringing with her Lucy, the granddaughter he had never known. The meeting had been planned for the following weekend, giving everyone time to process the magnitude of the changes that were occurring. Michael and Patricia had reacted with more skepticism. Michael, especially, had expressed concern about Matthew's motivations. "Mom," he had told her during a tense call, "this man abandoned our family 50 years ago. Now that Dad Charles is dead and you're in financial difficulties, he conveniently appears with money and promises. Doesn't that seem suspicious to you?" Sophia had had to patiently explain the true story of the separation, revealing details she had never shared with her younger children about the Harrison family's threats and her own sacrifice to protect the Mitchells. The revelation had changed Michael's perspective, but hadn't completely eliminated his reservations. Patricia, being a nurse and having seen many situations where elderly people were taken advantage of, had insisted she wanted to meet Matthew personally before giving her approval to the relationship. "I understand their concerns," Matthew had said when Sophia told him about her children's reactions. "They're good children who want to protect their mother. I would do the same in their place. Give me the chance to show them my intentions are genuine." One afternoon, while having tea in the garden that had begun to bloom again under the care of a gardener Matthew had hired, Sophia addressed the topic she had been avoiding since their reunion. "Matthew," she said carefully, "we need to talk about the practical expectations of our relationship." He looked up from the roses he had been personally pruning, an activity he had rediscovered as therapeutic. "What kind of expectations?" "Intimate expectations," she responded, blushing slightly despite her age. "We're older people who have lived complete lives with other people. We can't assume that physical passion is going to be the same as when we were 22. Matthew approached her and took her hands, which he now knew as well as his own hands after days of touching them constantly, as if he needed physical confirmation that she was really there. "Sophia, I've learned that true love is much more than physical passion. It's companionship, it's understanding, it's the peace of waking up next to someone who knows your soul completely. If passion comes naturally, it will be a gift. If not, we'll have something much deeper and more lasting." "And if people talk?" she asked. "And if they say we're two old fools playing at being young again?" "Let them talk," he responded with a smile. "I've spent 50 years worrying about what people think, living according to others' expectations. I'm going to live the rest of my life according to what my heart tells me is right. And my heart tells me that being with you is the most right thing I've ever done." That night, while dining in the formal dining room that hadn't been used in years, Matthew asked her a question he had been considering for days. "Do you want a big wedding, or do you prefer something intimate?" Sophia almost choked on her soup. Are you serious about marrying? Completely serious. I want you to be my wife legally, not just in name. I want you to have all the rights and protections that implies. I want Ellen and her siblings to know this isn't a temporary whim, but a lifetime commitment. A small ceremony, she responded after a moment of reflection. With our children, some close friends, nothing ostentatious. At our age, what's important isn't the celebration, but the commitment. Perfect, he said, raising his wineglass in a toast. To second beginnings and love that never dies. To finding our way back home, she responded, touching her glass to his, and as they toasted in the dining room that would soon be filled with the sound of a reunited family, both knew they had made the right decision. It wasn't the end of the story they had begun 50 years ago. It was the beginning of a completely new chapter, written with the wisdom of age and the strength of a love that had survived everything life had been able to throw at it. The morning Ellen was to arrive in Georgia, Matthew woke up with a mixture of nervousness and excitement he hadn't felt since his youth. He had spent the previous night tossing and turning in bed, imagining what it would be like to meet the daughter he had lost the chance to raise. Would she have his temperament, his way of thinking, or would she be completely a stranger who shared only his genetic material? Sophia had noticed his anxiety and had tried to calm him during breakfast. Ellen is a wonderful woman, she had told him while serving him coffee. She's intelligent, compassionate, hard-working. She has your persistence when she wants something, but also my patience for dealing with life's difficulties. And if she doesn't like me, Matthew had asked, with a vulnerability she found touching, and if she thinks I'm trying to replace Charles, that I was a coward for not looking for her before. Give her time, Sophia had responded. She's had 50 years to create an image of you in her mind. She'll need time to reconcile that image with the reality of who you are now. The airport had been a whirlwind of emotions. Matthew had insisted on hiring a private driver to pick up Ellen and Lucy, but he and Sophia had gone personally to wait for them in the arrivals area. When the doors opened and passengers began to exit, Matthew felt his heart dangerously accelerate. "That's Ellen," Sophia whispered, pointing toward a 52-year-old woman with graying chestnut hair and, indeed, Matthew's same blue eyes. She walked with purpose and dignity, carrying a small suitcase and accompanied by a younger woman who was obviously her daughter. "My God," Matthew murmured, "she looks like you, but she has my eyes." "And Lucy is identical to how you were when you were her age," Sophia added. "When you see the old photographs I have, you won't be able to believe the resemblance." Ellen saw them before they could approach. She stopped in the middle of the crowd, studying Matthew's face with an intensity he immediately recognized because it was the same way he analyzed people when he met them for the first time. The initial meeting was awkward but cordial. Ellen hugged her mother with visible relief, but when she turned to Matthew, there was a moment of hesitation before extending her hand formally to shake his. "Mr. Harrison," she said with an educated but cautious voice. "Thank you for inviting us to your home. Please, call me Matthew," he responded, shaking her hand and noticing she had the same long fingers as him. "And thank you for coming. I know this must be very confusing for you." "Confusing is a gentle way to describe it," Ellen responded with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "But Mom explained the situation, and I understand that neither of you was at fault for what happened." Lucy had been more direct in her curiosity. During the car ride to the mansion, she had bombarded Matthew with questions about his life, his work, his interests. She was a nurse, as Sophia had mentioned, and had the same tendency to go straight to the point without unnecessary detours. "So," she had said during a conversation in the car, "what are your plans for the future? Is this a temporary reconciliation, or are you really planning to rebuild a long-term relationship?" The question had taken everyone by surprise with its frankness, But Matthew had appreciated the direct honesty. "We're planning to marry," he had responded simply. "I recognize it may seem hasty after only a week of reunion, but when you're 78 years old, you don't have time for long courtships. We know what we want, and we want to build a family together." Ellen had remained silent for the rest of the trip, processing this information. The visit to the mansion had been revealing for everyone. Ellen had walked through the elegant rooms with a mixture of admiration and discomfort, clearly aware of the contrast between the world she had grown up in and the world where she could have grown up if circumstances had been different. "It's beautiful," she had commented, observing the garden from the main terrace. "Very different from what I'm used to." "Houses don't make families," Matthew had responded. "I've lived alone in this mansion for 7 years, and it's been the loneliest place in the world. But since your mother returned, it feels like a home again." During dinner, Ellen had begun to gradually relax. She had asked questions about Matthew's life, his marriage to Grace, his relationship with Robert. She had shared stories about her own life, her career as a teacher, her failed marriage, the challenges of raising Lucy alone while working and studying. "I always wondered why I had such difficulty connecting emotionally with men," she had confessed during dessert. "Now I understand that maybe I was looking for something I had lost before I was born, the connection with my biological father." The breaking point had come when Matthew had taken out the photo album he had been preparing all week. Photographs of his youth, his parents, the house where he had grown up, the places where he had studied. "This was the house where I planned to live with your mother," he had said, showing her a photograph of a small but elegant property on the outskirts of the city. "I bought it after our engagement. I sold it when I thought she had abandoned me." Ellen had taken the photograph in her hands, studying it intently. "Can I ask you something personal?" she had said finally. "Of course. Would you have loved me? If you had known I existed, would you really have loved me, or would it have just been an obligation?" The question had pierced Matthew's heart like an arrow. He had gotten up from the table and had walked to Ellen, kneeling beside her chair as he had done with Lucy when she was little. "Ellen," he had said with a voice trembling with emotion, "every day for the past 50 years, I've felt that something was missing in my life. Now I know what it was. It was you. You would have been the most important thing in my world. I would have moved mountains to give you everything you needed, not just materially, but emotionally. I would have been the proudest father in the world." And finally, after 3 days of caution and mutual evaluation, Ellen had cried. She had cried for the father she never knew, for the lost years, for the opportunities they never had. But she had also cried with relief, because she had finally found the missing piece in the puzzle of her identity. "Can I call you Dad?" she had asked with the voice of a little girl despite her 52 years. "Nothing in the world would make me happier," he had responded, hugging her for the first time with all the paternal love he had been saving for decades. And while they embraced in the mansion's dining room, with Sophia and Lucy crying with joy beside them, everyone knew they had achieved something extraordinary. They had built a family not just on the basis of shared blood, but on the conscious choice to love each other despite lost time and imperfect circumstances. The miracle hadn't just been Matthew and Sophia's reunion. It had been the creation of a family that had never existed, but had always been destined to form. 1 week after Ellen and Lucy returned to Vancouver, with promises to maintain constant contact and plans to move closer to Georgia, Matthew woke up with a clarity of purpose he hadn't felt in decades. During the days following the emotional reunion with his daughter, he had been thinking deeply about the future he wanted to build with Sophia, not just as a romantic fantasy, but as a practical and lasting reality. He found Sophia in the garden, as she had begun to do each morning since moving to the mansion. She was kneeling beside the roses, with her hands buried in the earth, her grey hair gathered in a loose bun that let some strands escape that the morning wind moved gently. She wore one of the simple dresses he had insisted on buying her, light blue that enhanced her honey-colored eyes and gave her an appearance of serenity that made her look years younger. "Good morning, my life," he said, using the term of endearment he had adopted naturally after so many years of not being able to pronounce it. "Good morning, my love," she responded, getting up and cleaning her hands on the apron she had found in the kitchen. "The roses are responding well to care. I think by next month we'll have the most beautiful garden in the neighborhood." Matthew approached and took her hands, noticing how earth had embedded under her short, clean nails. They were the hands of a woman who had worked hard all her life, but who could now dedicate herself to activities that gave her pleasure instead of just survival. "Sophia," he said, with a seriousness in his voice that made her look at him with complete attention. "We need to talk about our future in a specific and practical way." She frowned slightly, detecting something different in his tone. "Has something happened? Are you having doubts about all this?" "Quite the opposite," he responded, guiding her toward the wrought-iron bench he had ordered installed under the largest rosebush. "I'm more certain than ever that I want to spend the rest of my life with you. That's why we need to do this correctly, officially, in a way that gives security to both you and our children." They sat together on the bench, and Matthew took from his shirt pocket a sealed envelope containing documents he had been preparing secretly for the past few days. "What is that?" Sophia asked, with curiosity but also a hint of apprehension. "It's the most practical and least romantic marriage proposal you've probably heard in your life," he responded with a smile. "But before you open the envelope, I want to ask you something formally." Matthew got up from the bench and, to Sophia's complete amazement, knelt in front of her with the grace his 78 years allowed. From his pants pocket, he took the small blue velvet box he had kept for 51 years. "Sophia Mitchell," he said, with a voice trembling with emotion, "more than half a century ago I asked you to be my wife, and circumstances prevented us from fulfilling that promise. Today, as a man who has lived long enough to understand the true value of love, I ask you again, will you marry me?" He opened the box, revealing the diamond ring he had bought for her in 1971. The stones sparkled under the morning light, reflecting decades of preserved hope and love that had never died. Sophia covered her mouth with her hands, with tears running down her cheeks. For 50 years she had dreamed of this moment. But now that it was happening, she felt overwhelmed by the reality of what it meant. "Matthew," she whispered, "are you completely sure? Sure it's not just nostalgia or the desire to correct past mistakes?" "Look inside the envelope," he responded, staying kneeled. "Read what I've prepared, and then give me your answer." With trembling hands, Sophia opened the envelope and took out several carefully prepared documents. The first was a new will that named her as the main beneficiary of all his assets. The second was a legal document that established a trust fund for Ellen, Michael, Patricia, and their respective children. The third was a detailed plan to financially help the entire family, including paying for Lucy's university education and support so Michael could open his own business. "Matthew," she said with a choked voice, this is too much. I can't accept all this." "You're not accepting the documents," he responded gently. "You're accepting me. Everything else is simply the practical way of showing that my intentions are completely serious. I want you to know that if something happens to me, you and our family will be protected. I want you to know this isn't a whim of a lonely old man, but a lifetime commitment." Sophia read each document carefully, noticing how he had thought of every detail, every possible need that might arise. It wasn't just a marriage proposal. It was the proposal of a completely new life, structured and planned. "There's one condition," Matthew added, seeing that she had finished reading. "All this only takes effect if you marry me legally. I'm not buying your love, Sophia. I'm investing in our future together." She carefully folded the documents and set them aside. then took Matthew's hands in hers and helped him up from the ground. "Matthew Harrison," she said with a smile that completely transformed her face. 51 years ago, I said yes to this question, and my answer hasn't changed. Yes, I want to be your wife. Yes, I want to build a life with you. And yes, I accept everything this means, including the responsibility of being part of a family I never had the opportunity to know." When he slipped the ring on her finger, both noticed it fit perfectly, as if time hadn't passed, as if her hands had been waiting 50 years to complete this moment. "Now," Sophia said, admiring how the diamond sparkled on her hand, "we need to plan a wedding. And we need to do it quickly, because at our age, every day counts." "How quickly?" Matthew asked, hugging her. "What do you think about 3 weeks? Enough time for Ellen to come, for Robert to make the legal arrangements, and for me to get to know Michael and Patricia better before officially becoming their stepmother." Matthew laughed, a sound full of pure joy he hadn't made in decades. "Stepmother at 75. Do you realize how extraordinary our story is?" "I realize we're two very fortunate people," she responded, "to have had a second chance when most people don't even have a real first chance at true love." They stayed embraced in the garden, surrounded by roses that were blooming again after years of abandonment, mentally planning the wedding that would officially seal the miracle that had begun when she knocked on his door asking for work and found, instead, the home she had been searching for her entire life. That afternoon, Matthew called Robert to begin the legal preparations, while Sophia began making the phone calls that would bring together a family that had never been together but had always been destined to meet. The following days were a whirlwind of activity that filled the mansion with an energy it hadn't known in decades. Robert had become the official wedding coordinator, hiring a discreet and efficient wedding planner who understood this wasn't an ostentatious celebration, but an intimate yet deeply meaningful ceremony. Sophia had insisted the ceremony take place in the mansion's garden, under the roses that had bloomed as a symbol of their renewed love. "We want to marry surrounded by new life," she had explained to the wedding planner. "We want the place to reflect the idea that it's never too late for beautiful things to bloom." The guest list was small but carefully considered. Ellen and Lucy would fly from Vancouver. Michael had managed to get permission from work to travel from Denver with his wife Carmen and their 2 teenage children. Patricia had coordinated her hospital shifts to take a week off and finally meet the man who would become her stepfather. "I'm nervous about meeting Michael and Patricia," Matthew had confessed to Robert during one of their conversations about the preparations. "Ellen accepted me after several days of getting to know each other gradually. They're going to arrive only 2 days before the wedding, and they'll have to process everything very quickly." "Dad," Robert had responded with the practical wisdom he had developed as a lawyer, "you can't control how they react. You can only be authentic and give them time to get to know you. If your relationship with Sophia is real, they'll perceive it." Sophia, for her part, had been in constant phone contact with Michael and Patricia, gradually preparing them for the meeting and explaining not just the practical aspects of the situation, but also the emotional depth of what was occurring. "Son," she had told Michael during one of their longest conversations, "I know this must seem very strange to you. Your 75-year-old mother marrying a man you don't know. But I need you to understand this isn't a whim. It's the culmination of a love story that began before you were born." Michael had been direct with his concerns, as always. "Mom, it's not that I oppose you being happy. It's that I worry this man is taking advantage of your economic vulnerability. It's very convenient that he appears just when you need him most." "Son," Sophia had responded with patience, "he didn't know about my economic situation when we reunited. I went to his house asking for work, but when we recognized each other, everything changed." It's not that he's rescuing me from poverty. It's that destiny reunited us at the moment when we both most needed to find our family. Patricia had been more analytical in her approach, asking specific questions about the practical aspects of the relationship. Mom, 50 years have passed. People change. How do you know the man you love now is the same man you loved when you were 22? He's not the same man, Sophia had admitted. He's better. He's wiser, gentler, more aware of the real value of important things. And I'm not the same woman either. We're two people who have lived complete lives and have reached the conclusion that life is too short to waste the time we have left in solitude when we can spend it together. 3 days before the wedding, Michael arrived with his family. Matthew had insisted on picking them up personally at the airport, despite the nerves he felt about the meeting. When he saw Michael for the first time, he immediately noticed the resemblance to Sophia, the same determination in the jaw, the same direct way of observing people, the same dignified posture that had characterized his mother all her life. "Mr. Harrison," Michael had said, shaking his hand with a firm but not hostile grip. "Thank you for receiving my family in your home." "Thank you for coming, Michael," Matthew had responded. "I know this must be very strange for you, but I hope you can give me the chance to get to know you before forming a definitive opinion." The trip to the mansion had been initially silent, but Michael's children, David 16 and Anna 14, had begun asking questions about the house, about Georgia, about the differences between their life in Denver and life in the capital. Their innocent questions had broken the ice, and by the time they reached the mansion, the atmosphere had relaxed considerably. Carmen, Michael's wife, had been particularly impressed by the house's elegance, but also by the warm way Sophia had received them. "Mrs. Sophia," she had said during the welcome dinner, "you look so happy. It's been years since I've seen you smile this way." "It's because it's been years since I've had real reasons to smile like this," Sophia had responded, taking Matthew's hand over the table. "But now I feel like I've finally arrived home." Michael had observed this interaction with attention, noticing the naturalness with which his mother and Matthew related, the way they anticipated each other's needs, how their conversations flowed as if they had been talking for decades instead of just a few weeks. "Mr. Harrison," he had said finally during dessert, "I can see my mother is genuinely happy with you. That's the only thing that really matters to me. But I need you to understand that if you ever hurt her, you'll have to answer to her children." "Michael," Matthew had responded seriously, "your mother has suffered enough pain for an entire lifetime. My only intention is to make sure the rest of her days are filled with joy, comfort, and love. I give you my word that I'll take care of her like the treasure she is." The conversation had marked a turning point. Michael hadn't immediately embraced Matthew like Ellen had done, but he had begun to relax, to ask questions about his life, his work, his plans for the future with Sophia. Patricia arrived the next day, directly from the hospital where she had been working double shifts to be able to take the week off. She was the most physically similar to Sophia, but had the intensity of someone accustomed to making life-and-death decisions in emergency situations. Her evaluation of Matthew was clinical but not hostile. During their first private conversation with him, she had asked direct questions about his health, his finances, his long-term medical care plans. "Mr. Harrison," she had said, with the frankness that characterized medical professionals, "you're 78 years old. My mother is 75. Statistically, it's likely one of you will need intensive medical care in the coming years. Have you discussed how you're going to handle that situation?" "We've talked about that," Matthew had responded, appreciating her direct approach. "I have excellent medical insurance that now also covers your mother. I've modified my will to ensure that if something happens to me, she has all the necessary resources for any medical care she might need. And if she needs care, I'll take complete responsibility. And if you both need care at the same time." Then our children will work together to ensure we both receive the attention we need. Patricia, I'm not looking for a nurse for my final years. I'm looking for a companion to fully live the time we have left, whether it's a lot or a little. The response had satisfied Patricia, who had begun to see Matthew not as a threat or opportunist, but as a man who had genuinely thought about all the practical aspects of building a life with her mother. That night, during the family dinner, where everyone was gathered for the first time, Robert had raised his glass in a toast. To families that are formed not just by blood, but by choice, he had said. To loves that survive time and circumstances. And to miracles that occur when we least expect them. And as everyone toasted in the mansion's dining room, full for the first time in years, with the sound of a large and loving family, Matthew and Sophia knew they had achieved something extraordinary. They had not only found their way back to each other, but had created a new family that honored both the past and the future. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and sunny, as if the universe had decided to bless the union that had taken 51 years to take place. Sophia woke up in the guest room, where she had insisted on spending her last night as a single woman. Although the separation from Matthew, after weeks of sleeping in adjoining rooms, had been harder than she had anticipated, Ellen had arrived 2 days earlier and had taken the role of her mother's emotional coordinator, helping her with the final preparations and making sure every detail was perfect. It was strange and wonderful, Sophia had thought, to finally have her eldest daughter acting like a true daughter in one of the most important moments of her life. "Mom," Ellen had said while helping her put on the dress they had chosen together. "Are you nervous?" "Terribly nervous," Sophia had admitted. Looking at herself in the full-length mirror, she had chosen a champagne-colored dress, elegant but appropriate for her age, with delicate lace on the sleeves and a cut that flattered her figure without trying to pretend a youth she no longer had. "But not for the reasons you might think." "What do you mean?" "I'm not nervous about marrying your father. I'm completely sure about that. I'm nervous about all the happiness I feel. After so many years of settling for small moments of joy, having so much happiness at once scares me as if it were too good to be true." Ellen had smiled, adjusting the simple veil they had decided Sophia would wear. "Mom, you deserve every moment of this happiness. You deserve to have a love that celebrates you instead of simply tolerating you. You deserve to have a family that values you for who you really are." In the main bedroom, Matthew was going through a similar process with Robert, who had insisted on helping his adoptive father prepare for the most important day of his life in decades. "Do you know what's strangest about all this?" Matthew had said, while Robert helped him with the gold cufflinks that had belonged to his own father. "I feel like I'm 25 again, but with the wisdom of 78. It's as if my entire life had been preparation for this moment." "Dad," Robert had said, noticing how his father's hands trembled slightly with emotion, "in all the years I lived with Mom Grace and you, I never saw you as genuinely happy as I've seen you these past weeks. She would have wanted you to be happy." The ceremony had been planned for 5 in the afternoon, when the sunlight would create the perfect atmosphere in the garden. The wedding planner had transformed the space into something magical: arches of white flowers and roses, elegant chairs for the 24 guests, an improvised altar under the largest rose bush where Matthew and Sophia had had so many important conversations. Guests had begun arriving an hour early. In addition to immediate family, there were some close friends of Robert's, Matthew's sister Anne, who had traveled from Miami with her husband, and surprisingly, 2 of Sophia's former co-workers whom Ellen had managed to contact as a surprise for her mother. "I can't believe Maria and Hope are here," Sophia had murmured when she saw her friends among the guests. "I hadn't seen them in years." "I thought you'd like to have witnesses of your previous life here to celebrate your new life," Ellen had explained. "They told me stories about you I'd never heard, about how you always talked about a great love from your youth, about how you never stopped believing in happy endings." When the time came for the ceremony, Matthew was already waiting by the altar, dressed in a dark grey suit that gave him a distinguished and elegant appearance. His hands were clasped in front of him, but Robert could see they trembled slightly with anticipation. The music began to play, an instrumental version of Amazing Grace that had been Sophia's favourite song during her youth. The guests stood up, and Matthew felt his heart stop when he saw Sophia appear at the garden entrance. Ellen had insisted on walking with her mother to the altar, a symbol of how the family had finally come together. Sophia had accepted, understanding that this gesture meant much more than tradition. It meant her daughter was officially giving her to the man who should have been her father from the beginning. As they walked slowly along the rose-petal path they had scattered that morning, Sophia felt as if she were walking not just toward her future, but toward the completeness she had been searching for her entire life. Each step brought her closer to the man she had loved constantly and unconditionally for more than half a century. Matthew watched her approach, feeling time slow down as in life's most significant moments. He didn't see a 75-year-old woman walking toward him. He saw the 22-year-old girl who had captured his heart at a county fair, the mature woman who had sacrificed her own happiness to protect her family, the dignified elderly woman who had knocked on his door asking for work and had found the home that had always been waiting for her. When Ellen placed her mother's hand in Matthew's, the words she pronounced were simple but deeply meaningful. "Dad, I give you the most extraordinary woman I've known. Take care of her like the treasure she is." "With my life," Matthew had responded, taking Sophia's hands in his and feeling the warmth and strength that had been waiting 50 years to find each other again. The ceremony was officiated by a judge friend of Robert's who had agreed to personalize the vows to reflect the unique nature of this union. The traditional words about in sickness and in health, in wealth and in poverty took on special meaning when pronounced by two people who had already experienced all those circumstances and had reached the conclusion that only true love really mattered. When the time came for personal vows, Matthew spoke first, with a clear voice despite the emotion that threatened to overwhelm him. "Sophia, 51 years ago I promised I would love you forever, and despite all the circumstances that separated us, I never broke that promise. Today I promise you that I'll use every day I have left of life to make up for the time we lost, to take care of you as I always should have, and to love you with the intensity that only comes from truly understanding how precious a second chance is." Sophia responded with tears running down her cheeks, but with a firm and clear voice. "Matthew, when I disappeared from your life so many years ago, I carried with me the promise that my love for you would never die. Today, I can finally fulfill that promise. I promise you that I'll be your companion, your family, your home. I promise you that we'll build together a life that honors both what we lost and what we've found. And I promise you that every day I spend with you will be a gift I'll treasure as the miracle it really is." When the judge declared them husband and wife, and Matthew kissed his new wife under the rose arch that had bloomed as a symbol of their renewed love, everyone present felt they were witnessing something much more significant than a simple wedding. They were witnessing the culmination of a story that had begun decades ago, living proof that true love can survive any obstacle, and that it's never too late for hearts destined to be together to finally find their way home. The reception that followed the ceremony was intimate, but full of joy, celebrated on the mansion's main terrace that had been decorated with the same flowers that had adorned the altar. The small tables allowed for close conversations, and soft music created a perfect atmosphere for 3 generations of family to really get to know each other for the first time. Matthew had hired a discreet photographer who captured spontaneous moments, Ellen crying with joy while watching her parents dance their first song as spouses, Michael genuinely laughing for the first time in days, while Robert told him funny stories about Matthew's youth, Patricia helping serve champagne with the naturalness of someone who finally felt part of the family. But the most emotional moment came when Lucy approached the microphone they had set up for toasts and asked permission to say a few words. "Grandma Sophia, Grandpa Matthew," she began, with a clear but emotional voice. "I grew up thinking I had an incomplete family. I thought something important was missing because my grandfather had died before I was born, and we never knew Ellen's biological father. But now I understand we weren't missing anything. We were simply waiting for the right moment to be complete." She stopped to take a sip of water, clearly emotional, but determined to continue. "What you've done isn't just finding each other after 50 years. What you've done is show all of us that true love knows no time, that families can form in unexpected ways, and that it's never too late to choose happiness." She raised her glass toward the newlywed couple. "And to my grandparents, who have taught me that happy endings aren't just for fairy tales, but for people who have the courage to believe in them and fight for them." The toast was followed by others equally emotional. Robert spoke about how he had seen his father transform in recent weeks, going from being a man who simply existed to being someone who truly lived. Anne, Matthew's sister, confessed through tears that she had never seen her brother so genuinely happy, not even during his marriage to Grace. Michael surprised everyone, especially his mother, when he stood up to make his own toast. "Mr. Harrison, Dad Matthew," he said, using the title he had been mentally rehearsing since the ceremony. "Throughout my life, I saw my mother sacrifice her own happiness for her children's well-being. I saw her work jobs she hated, marry a good man who wasn't her great love, and smile through difficulties that would have broken weaker people." He paused, looking directly at Matthew. "For the first time in my life, I see my mother living for herself, being happy for reasons that have nothing to do with her obligations as a mother or grandmother. And that's a gift I can never thank you enough for. Welcome to the family, Dad." When the music began for dancing, Matthew and Sophia headed to the small dance floor they had prepared in the center of the terrace. The song they had chosen was "Amazing Grace," the same one that had played during the ceremony, but this time sung by a version they had heard together during their youth. While they danced slowly, aware that everyone was watching them but lost in their own private world, Sophia whispered in Matthew's ear, "Do you realize we're officially married now? After 51 years, we're finally married." "I realize I'm the luckiest man in the world," he responded, holding her closer. "And I realize that every day of suffering, every year of loneliness, every moment of pain was worth it to reach this moment with you. Do you regret anything?" she asked. "Don't you regret the years we lost, the opportunities we didn't have?" Matthew stopped for a moment and looked directly into her eyes, with the terrace's soft lights reflecting in his blue eyes. "I regret not having fought harder for the truth 50 years ago. I regret having believed my parents' lies without investigating for myself. I regret not having been braver when we were young," he said honestly. "But I don't regret the path that brought us here, because it has made us into the people we are now. People who know how to value what we have. People who understand that love is life's only real treasure." When the song ended, they didn't separate immediately. They stayed embraced in the center of the dance floor, surrounded by family applauding softly, aware that this moment marked the beginning of a new phase of their lives. Later that night, after the guests had retired to their rooms or returned to their hotels, Matthew and Sophia sat in the garden under the stars, still dressed in their wedding clothes, but with formal shoes replaced by comfortable slippers. "Mrs. Harrison," Matthew said, testing how the name sounded that she now officially carried. "I like how it sounds," she responded, smiling. "After 75 years, I'm finally Mrs. Harrison." "What do we do tomorrow?" he asked. "What does a newly married couple our age do the day after their wedding?" "Tomorrow," Sophia said, taking his hand and intertwining their fingers. "Tomorrow we begin living the rest of our lives. We plan trips we never had the chance to take together. We create new family traditions. We get to know our grandchildren better. We write letters to Ellen, Michael, and Patricia, telling them stories from our youth they've never heard. And the day after tomorrow. The day after tomorrow we do the same, and the day after that too. Matthew, we've waited 50 years to have ordinary days together. Now we're going to celebrate every ordinary day as the extraordinary gift it really is. They stayed sitting in the garden until very late, talking about the small plans they wanted to make, about how they wanted to organize their daily life, about the simple joy of waking up each morning knowing they wouldn't be alone. And when they finally headed toward the house, toward the master bedroom they would now share as spouses, both knew they had achieved something very few people experience in life. They had found not only their great love, but also their home, their family, and the peace that comes from knowing that, no matter what the future might bring, they would face it together. 6 months after the wedding, on a golden spring morning, Matthew woke up as he had begun to do every day since marrying Sophia, with a sense of gratitude so deep it sometimes overwhelmed him. He turned toward his side of the bed where she still slept, watching how the dawn light created soft patterns on her relaxed face. During these months, they had established a routine that was simple but deeply satisfying. They breakfasted together on the terrace, cared for the garden that had bloomed spectacularly under their shared attention, received frequent family visits, and spent afternoons reading together in the study or simply talking about everything and nothing. Ellen had moved from Vancouver to Atlanta, accepting a job as director of a bilingual school that allowed her to live closer to her parents. Lucy had decided to study a graduate degree in nursing at a Georgia university, claiming she wanted to better know her family roots, but really because she had found in Matthew the grandfather she had always dreamed of having. Michael had finally accepted Matthew's financial help to open his own auto repair shop, and his business was prospering so much he had been able to bring his family to live closer to the capital. Patricia continued working in Seattle, but had established the habit of spending her vacations at the mansion, and had begun referring to Matthew as Dad, with a naturalness that moved him every time he heard it. Robert had observed his father's transformation with genuine joy. The melancholic and lonely man he had been after Grace's death had been replaced by someone vital, actively involved in the life of a large and loving family. That particular morning was special because the entire family would be gathered to celebrate Sophia's 76th birthday. Ellen had organized a family lunch in the garden, and all the children, grandchildren, and in-laws would be present. "Good morning, my love," Sophia murmured, opening her eyes and meeting Matthew's gaze, watching her with the same adoration she had seen in him 50 years ago. "Good morning, birthday girl," he responded, leaning to kiss her softly. "How does it feel to be 76? It feels like being 25 again, but with enough wisdom to really appreciate how fortunate I am," she responded, stretching like a satisfied cat. They got up together and headed to the terrace where they had breakfast every morning. The garden stretched before them in all its spring glory. The roses they had planted together bloomed abundantly. The fruit trees Matthew had ordered planted as a wedding gift were loaded with promising flowers, and the green, perfectly maintained grass invited barefoot walks. "Do you know what I like most about our life together?" Sophia asked while Matthew served her coffee in the porcelain cup she had begun to consider exclusively hers. "Tell me," he responded, sitting beside her at the wrought-iron table they had placed exactly where they had had their first real conversation after the reunion. "I like that we've learned to value small things. When we were young, we dreamed of great adventures, dramatic passions, changing the world. Now we know that true happiness is in moments like this, having breakfast together while the sun rises, planning what flowers to plant in the garden corner, waiting for family to arrive to celebrate together." Matthew nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. During recent months, he had discovered that true happiness wasn't in grand romantic gestures, but in the accumulation of thousands of small moments of shared contentment. "Do you regret anything about these months?" he asked her, a question he had begun asking regularly, not from insecurity, but from genuine desire to ensure she was completely happy. "I regret not having trusted destiny 50 years ago," she responded without hesitation. "I regret having believed that love had to be sacrificed for duty, but I don't regret anything we've lived since I found you again." The family began arriving around noon. Ellen was first, carrying a cake she had baked personally and inscribed "For the bravest grandmother in the world." Robert arrived shortly after with flowers from the market and a specially chosen gift, a photo album he had been secretly compiling with images of the entire family from the wedding to the present. Michael, Carmen and their children arrived in a new truck they had been able to buy thanks to the shop's success, and the teenagers immediately ran to Matthew to show him the excellent grades they had gotten in the private school where they now studied. Patricia arrived that afternoon, after flying all night from Seattle, with a surprise that made Sophia cry. She had gotten a work transfer that would allow her to move to Georgia within 6 months. "Are you sure, dear?" Sophia had asked, hugging her youngest daughter. "I don't want you to sacrifice your career to be close to us." "Mom," Patricia had responded with a smile, "I've spent the last 15 years building a successful career, but I've been alone most of the time. Now I want to be close to my family. I want to get to know Dad Matthew better. I want my future children to know their grandparents. I want to be part of this beautiful thing you've built." The lunch extended for hours, with conversations jumping from table to table, grandchildren running through the garden, adults getting to know each other better with each encounter. Matthew observed everything from his place at the head of the table, feeling a fullness he had thought impossible at his age. When it was time to open gifts, Sophia felt overwhelmed by her new family's generosity. Ellen had given her a pearl necklace that had belonged to Charles's grandmother, symbolizing the continuity between past and present. Michael had gifted her a hybrid rose plant he had developed especially for her. Patricia had brought her a collection of international cookbooks, knowing her mother had begun experimenting with recipes from different countries. But Matthew's gift was what made her cry most deeply. It was a legal document that established a charitable foundation in her name, designed to help elderly women who found themselves in difficult economic situations, providing them not only financial help, but also opportunities for dignified work and job training. "Matthew," she had whispered, reading the documents with tears running down her cheeks, "this is too much." "It's exactly what a woman who has dedicated her entire life to helping others deserves," he had responded. "Now you'll have the opportunity to help other women who find themselves in the situation you were in when you knocked on my door." When the sun began to set and the family gathered in the garden to take photographs, Robert suggested that Matthew and Sophia sit on the bench where they had had so many important conversations during recent months. "Grandma Sophia, Grandpa Matthew," Lucy had said, who had become the family's official photographer, "can you sit exactly like you were when you reunited?" Matthew and Sophia had looked at each other and smiled, remembering that first afternoon when everything had changed forever. "We can't sit like we were when we reunited," Sophia had said with a mischievous smile, "because when we reunited, I was asking for work in the rain, soaked and desperate. Now I'm the lady of this house, dry, comfortable and happier than I ever thought possible." "Then sit like you are now," Ellen had suggested. "Sit like the couple that has found their way home after a lifetime of searching." Day, and while the family surrounded them, while the sun set over the garden they had cultivated together, while their children and grandchildren laughed and talked around them, Matthew and Sophia took each other's hands and smiled for the camera, knowing they were capturing not just a photograph, but evidence that miracles really do happen, that true love really does transcend time, and that it's never too late for two souls destined to be together to finally find their way back home. Was it everything you hoped for?" Matthew whispered to Sophia as they posed for the last photograph of the day. "It was more than I dared to dream," she responded, squeezing his hand. "The 50 years of waiting were worth it." "Every second," he confirmed, looking at her with the same love he had felt when he was 25, but now enriched by wisdom, gratitude, and the deep understanding of how precious a second chance is. And as the camera flash captured their image for posterity, both knew they had achieved something extraordinary. They had proven that true love not only survives time, but becomes stronger, deeper, and more beautiful with each passing year. They had found not only their personal happiness, but had created a family, a legacy, and a story that would be told to future generations as proof that happy endings don't just exist in fairy tales, but are available to anyone who has the courage to believe in them and the patience to wait for the perfect moment to arrive. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.